So, how's the day been going? Yeah? Lots of inspiring messages? Lots of common themes too, I think. So, I thought right from the beginning where Lindsay put up a book with Rosabeth Moss-Kanter's name on the front of it, who I think at one point was the highest paid management consultant in the US. And we've seen a lot of things since then that are themes that somebody changed my handwritten note to be nice and tidy. Do you know what? I hand wrote it. It was untidy, it was scrawled, it was still legible. And I'm going to pick up on a lot of the themes that we've heard over the course of the day today. And I think Andy just now went through a number of themes I'm going to pick up on, and I'm going to maybe disagree with him. Actually, that's probably too strong. But I'm going to perhaps have a different perspective and interpretation to a couple of things. And so my conversation with you is about the future. And I'm going to suggest that I think that there's a predictable future for PMOs, which is that they're heading in the direction, as Chris just identified for us, of the Chief Change Officer. And I'm also going to suggest that I think that's wrong and scary. No, it's not wrong, but it's incomplete. Because sometimes the organisation needs something that's more about transformation, but that isn't all the time. Whereas, who was it? Somebody earlier today, might have been Mark, said when you're running a PMO, you're running an operational function. And the thing that I think is a little bit scary about a CCO, a Chief Change Officer, is it sounds to me a bit like a COO. So a Chief Operating Officer, it sounds a bit like a CFO, a Chief Financial Officer. And these people have pretty much a background in it's the same every day, isn't it? It's cyclic. We do this stuff because it's the beginning of the year, and we do this stuff because it's the middle of the planning cycles. And I think that as PMO folk, we're about providing the expertise that needs to cope with it's discontinuous, it's different. The response of the past is not the response of tomorrow. So I'd like to, hey, worked for me. Well, that's only one press so far. I'd like to say I think that many PMOs are launched, they climb to a height, and what I'd like to see is stable onward flight for the PMO, but not crashing and burning as or screwing things up for other people as that one's showing. But I'd like to think about the history of where we've come from, because I think that explains the trajectory that we are on. And I think we need to question whether the world around us outside of our organisations actually needs us to continue down the path we're on, or maybe we need to think about whether that path is correct or not. So I think if we start to think of the business pressures, they start to suggest the shape of the future. So that's where I'm hoping to go over the time that we have together. When I started talking about this to Lindsay some months ago, I used the phrases benefits and value, and she immediately challenged and jumped on me. I think she thought maybe I was using them interchangeably and maybe not as clearly defined as perhaps I should have done. However, I explained them and she said, oh, okay, that's what I understand. And I just picked out the Axelos Global Best Practice stuff. My expressions, I thought that was good. I think all this printed background stuff like the PMBOK and the Axelos manuals, etc., is great best practice, but then I have to scratch my head and say, yeah, but mostly when you're trying to run change and things are discontinuous, that is to say there is not the continuity with the past, it's not best practice we want, it's expertise. And best practice is the codifying or the capturing of this stuff worked really well and will work really well again in the same circumstances. So if we're in different circumstances, and I think the future is change-rich. I think we're seeing change, as I will say in a slide in just a minute. So, how many folk here are either in a situation where their PMO has been challenged at some point, or feel that they are less than comfortable about its security and its longevity into the future? Okay, so that's a sort of third of the room. Well, that either means the other 2/3 are comfortable or haven't seen what's coming. Not sure which. There was a talk this morning. John Hello. I've run a few PMOs that have sort of got to the 3-year point, and I've gone, and I've been challenged a few times, and I've always replied, well, look, I tell you what, boss, chief financial officer, whoever, you go home and then think about how exposed you would be personally if I and my team weren't here. And if tomorrow you come back and you go, I understand what your role is, I'll stay, and if not, then that's the time to fire me. If I'm not protecting you, if I'm not making you feel like there's a service being provided here that keeps the organisation safe into the future, and then we have to think, what does that safety look like? And that safety, I suggest, looks like value, where value is benefit delivered in excess of the cost to produce it. So producing benefit's one thing, but you have to do that benefit where there's a phrase has been used today, a surplus of the return on investment over the cost. So I think we need to be focusing on how do we support the business and the world into the future in a way that delivers not just benefits but excess of benefit over cost. And then I think that the historical perspective and the we're challenged as PMOs runs into the little thing that's up here, which is really inspired by Tversky and Kahneman's behavioural economics stuff. I've got a couple of thoughts around that goes on along that line. But often as a PMO, what we identify is that, and I'll amplify some of this in a second, but what we identify is that we have been asked to consolidate information for visibility into the management for management decision making. And so to some parts of the organisation, we are clearly a cost. That is to say, we're a morale cost as well as we are a financial cost. And everybody can see that cost. It's very obvious in the financial accounting sides, the head counts. And it's also fairly visceral for the folk who are asked to do the stuff that if we just got out of the way, they could get on with their projects so much better. On the other side of the equation, though, balancing the cost is the benefit. But then everybody sees the same result differently in terms of how they judge, is that a benefit? Also, the benefits very often are not easily translated into straight pounds, shillings and pence, dollars, whatever, and thus it becomes harder to account them. So we have more diverse view of the benefit, but we have a clear view on the cost. And if we then bring in the behavioural economics bit, the people are, how they proved the number, I haven't gone and done the research, but Kahneman and Tversky suggested that, that we are loss averse versus gain attracted to the extent of 2.5 to 1. That is to say, a prospect of a benefit has to be 2.5 times the size of a prospect of a loss before I'm likely to be swayed in the direction of the benefit. So we have a situation in PMOs where our costs are easy to see, our values are debatable, even if we're giving good value, they're debatable, and unless this stuff is 2.5 times this, then the balance of decision making in the organisation is, let's get rid of it. So we have a struggling position from which to start. Did you want a picture?
Thank you. Got it.
Great. Hey, anybody else needs a picture? You just. I think that the whole of our approach to projects has been rooted in some really good seminal work that people did sort of 50, if not 80 years ago, where it was very clear, very easy to understand, project management is part of engineering. I mean, you have to do all this precedence stuff and work out the sequence in which you do tasks, and you need to budget it and all that sort of stuff. So we have project management with its roots in engineering. And I'm going to pick a number out of the air, really, but I'm going to say that as a history ran out of steam in about 1990. And if we had a lot longer, we could talk about how IT as a discipline from the 50s, 60s, 70s, 80s grew through re-implementing well-known processes and now does entirely new stuff that we were never capable of previously. So unless you're in sort of, say, shipbuilding or office block construction or whatever, there's a lot of elements of project management that came from a good discipline and are still necessary in the future, but they don't serve us so well in a change-rich world where, first of all, there's a lot of expertise at the bottom of the organisation. I mean, like who actually understands how to use Snapchat and Twitter and Facebook if you're actually more than, what, 20 or something? So our history comes from engineering, and I'm going to suggest, and that engineering knew things like, hey, you have a drawing office, because that's where all the drawing gets done. This is about economizing or using a rare skill so that the organisation can support the needs in lots of different places. So it's about fractional full-time equivalence. It's about using efficiency over staff. And that idea about you have a drawing office or a typing pool feeds into you have a records office, or you have a project management office that aggregates all this data together to put it in a format that goes up to the management community so that the management community has the information that they need. And there, I think, is one of our 1990s versus sort of 2050s or 2020s or even 2000 and whatever we are at the moment. That means that our customer was senior management, and management is about conformance to baseline, and baseline is about the ability to predict the future. You can't build a baseline, you can't build a plan if you don't know the actions required to achieve the results that can be specified. And as Andy was just saying, hey, don't deliver last quarter's objectives if this quarter the objectives are different. So our organisations are pressured externally in a dynamic fashion, and I think that if we are going to be delivering good benefit into the future, then what we need is a support function that allows the support not of the management. That's still going to be necessary. I'm not saying get rid of, but we're also going to need something that supports us with the leadership dimensions. So we have, I suggest, I have built them myself, I've worked in them, I've consulted to organisations where they're very prevalent. We have the PMO making the bureaucracy work smoothly. And I don't mean this bureaucracy as a disparaging term. After all, bureaucracy was what got me onto my aeroplane yesterday and got me off it and moved here, and meant when I turned up at my hotel, they actually knew who I was and said, yes, you've got a room. It got the water that's in this glass here. So bureaucracy is definitely important. And if as PMOs, we can take some of the messages that other people have been giving us today, which is about how do you smooth those processes that do that activity, how do you streamline them, etc. That's all good stuff. It's necessary, but I'm going to suggest it isn't sufficient. And I just want to suggest to those folk who either haven't seen the future coming or already feel a little insecure in your PMO, are you promoting cookie cutter solutions? I could have paid. Did you use cookie cutter this morning? Hey, look, we've got. I haven't put Nemawashi in here though. Damn, I missed a trick there. So if you're promoting cookie cutter solutions, is that the basis upon which your cost benefit analysis, as coming from the rest of the organisation, is analysing you on? Because if so, you've got that 2.5 to 1 incline to climb up. You need this stuff. Without this stuff, you're not on the playing field. But with this stuff, you're not winning the argument. Because the future there has this sort of change-rich dimension. It isn't predictable how you win the game tomorrow from what we did today, whereas it was predictable how you won the game in 1950 or 1990. Maybe less so, but not so much today. So we hear this, we've heard it several times today, and I got this lovely butterfly picture, which was very easy. I went on to Google Images and I went, change. And like the first 96 hits were chrysalises and butterflies, etc. It was such a paradigm that nobody thought that there was any other way to represent change than show a butterfly. But actually, I'm going to suggest that change is changing. It's more pervasive. So we have our worlds are now connected in this sort of fashion. So if we were 100 years ago, how long would it have taken for an event in London to have been something that was known about in the US? What's the round trip time between an event on a street in London and knowledge of it in Washington or New York or something 100 years ago? Is it like 3 days? Was there a sub-Atlantic cable there that would do it in like 45 minutes? You know, somebody sprints down to the local telegraph office and Now, what's the cycle time? I mean, it's not only is it seconds, but the conversation is into its third and fourth iteration. Not only that, when I send out a tweet, for example, you know, I've got this mega following. It's probably about 8 people. Some of them retweet it. So within a millisecond or within 5 minutes, it's gone out to, actually some of them are people like Lindsay, who has got lots of content. It's gone out to thousands of people. It bounces around. I had a conversation yesterday. Somebody asked me about something I mentioned Jackson's structured programming, and somebody sent me a tweet. I have no idea who they were, that said, oh, I'm feeling so nostalgic for COBOL. Within 10 minutes, I had a conversation with about 10 people who I've never met about COBOL. So complexity is accelerating because interconnectedness. We are more connected. The connections travel further and faster and have more points of contact. More impressions are made. And then all our businesses are in that position. Therefore, all our CEOs, all the boards of our organisations, all the chairs of the boards, etc., are being buffeted by a marketplace that's doing this. Then all our technical experts who traditionally were at the bottom of the organisation and didn't have technical expertise, they did what they were told through command and control mechanisms, now say, hey, you're missing a trick here. If you connect this, this and this, we can do this, which we previously wasn't able to, and our competition isn't. So now we have innovative transformation from the bottom, and we have the need to direct from the top, and we have pressure in the marketplace. And I think all of this adds up to, if what you do is aggregate data in order to be able to put that data up to the management community for decision making, then that's a useful function, but it's a long way short of what our potential ability to support the organisation is. Because somewhere in the organisation, we need the mechanisms by which the organisation copes with the change that's driven by the emergence. We see folk talk about things like agile, and I think agile is an interesting sort of social ripple in that project management was clearly failing. A bunch of techies in the software environment said, project management's failing for us, what do we need? So they invented a technical solution to how do you develop product. It's sort of getting there, maybe, about how does it become a business solution to how do we chart direction. And I was looking for clip art, and I just loved this one, which not only did I manage to find a piece of clip art, but it's also Creative Commons, so I was able to take it with credit there. And here we've gone sort of evolution up to the monarchy, the controlling function, and then through capitalism as the controlling function, and now, it could have been made for my purposes, and now connectivity as the controlling function, and connectivity as the driving factor. Now, I would say that this situation that's in blue at the bottom here means that you cannot now use top-down command and control mechanisms to run the organisation. And you think, I wonder if that problem's new. And it turns out that several Prussian generals around sort of 17-something really had thought this through. So there's Clausewitz, there's von Moltke. However, On War by Clausewitz, I'm making the number up, but it's like 25 volumes. I can imagine that there's a lifetime's reading in it. But this, I think it was McKinsey's, Stephen Bungay, wrote he's a military historian, but he was also a management consultant. And he said, what was it that these Prussian generals knew? And he summarises it really well in a way that's very applicable to our use in organisations. And he said what it was about was empowering people in the organisation to understand their limits of authority, to understand the skill set that they had, have the confidence to use that skill set situationally in their circumstances. And that, I'm going to suggest to you, is about we need somewhere in the organisation not the historical bit needs to be there, but it's not the future. The future is about leadership, and the leadership bit is about a lot of things we've heard today. It's about connecting people. It's about knowledge management. Because I suggest that what we've been suffering with for probably the last 20 years is the rate at which we're improving our ability to cope with change is slower than the rate at which change is driving our organisations. and that's why our PMOs either feel threatened or don't survive. So I'm going to suggest the PMO's roots are in admin and management. Its current path, it's necessary, it's unrewarding, it's not going to keep you in a role for forevermore. The future needs value, i.e. net benefit greater than cost, and leadership, they're existing. And then we come to some challenges, because I think I'm about to start suggesting that the PMO replaces the role of the chief exec and the chair. And I thought Andy did that in the last talk. He started saying, you've got to be a bold leader and cut things. And I thought, so what's the CEO's role then? What we're saying is that actually the PMO needs to be run by the CEO, or the PMO manager replaces the CEO and the chair. So I think that we've got some challenges about which road are we on. So we need in our organisations to think, what does my PMO do now? We need all that chartering stuff that we heard about several times today. You need to think about what's the charter of the PMO, and that is about going back to the organisation and saying, hey boss, what do you want us to do? Are we an admin function? Do we reduce the cost of you making management decisions? Or do we start to support, are we moving into the place where leadership needs leveraging, needs leverage, needs power added to its arm in order to cope with the disruptive, to cope with change? So we do need those mechanisms that are out there that have been about consistency, but I'm going to suggest that we need them to be focused on consistency of outcome, whereas they're too often focused on consistent application of process in an environment where the process application consistently is not sensible. But we also need the mechanisms that cope with the volatility that's out there in the marketplace and driving our organisations and ensuring that our organisations can continue into the future. And now it is a question of at what point does the role of the board's chair and the board in terms of protecting the capital of the organisation, public sector just as much, capital of the organisation is the organisation's culture and skills, etc. So are we usurping the board's role, the non-execs and indeed the execs here? Somewhere this stuff needs to be cared for. So it either is cared for at the top table, or somebody sits on the top table alongside them and advises as leverage, or maybe we're now seeing the top management of the organisation outsourcing some of their responsibilities in the way that day-to-day ordinary management has outsourced the management of change to a project manager. So the question now is, where is the PMO headed in terms of bringing a permanently enabled, permanently equipped capability that focuses on handling the transient needs that are in the different changes? In which case we're now talking about steering the process, where that process is about handling the waves of change that come at us. And at what point do we draw the boundary? Does that group of people who have expertise in change and support the top table, does that group of people now also start to take a role in what the content of that change is, which was something that Andy's last 5 or 6 bullet points said, stuff like you have to know, you have to have an intimate understanding of the business. As PMO manager, if I'm going to be chief change officer, I probably don't. If I'm going to support people who are leading transformational change, so I'm supporting them, then they definitely do. In which case, as PMO leader, do I now have to have an intimate understanding both from the sales, marketing, operations, HR, and all the other dimensions? It has to be somewhere. The question is, where does it fit? Whose role? Is it the traditional one? Therefore, what does the PMO do to support it? Yeah, which led me to a new set of thoughts. So what's the role of the CFO finance director? I mean, like, what do they, you knock on the door and there they are in their nice big office. What do they do all day? This is a chance for you to share some thoughts. And I don't really mean it facetiously, but what's the CFO doing? Can you put it into a sentence, anyone?
Managing the company's profit and loss.
looking at the profit and loss, understanding the profit and loss, and what does that then translate to? Can anybody expand that, or? Okay, it's looking at the sustainability, and it's looking at the sustainability from what perspective? Investment, funding, capital, where capital is money. But so it's about the flows through the organisation. What's coming in, what's going out. The money coming in has to pay the bills going out. The bills going out bring the resources in. The resources coming in get combined in a way that goes to the customer who brings us money out. Kaplan and Norton said it very nicely for us with, you need a balanced scorecard. They added 2 other dimensions to the ones that I've just included there. But money's not the only fuel. What's the picture on the that side? If I was in the car with a wife, that would be your side. So, as opposed to left and right, which are far too complicated. What other elements can you see in the picture on that far side over there that are actually capital driving the organisation? Again, opportunity to contribute. Okay, we got people there who know how to interact with each other, and equipment. It's human capital. And then we got process and all sorts of other things going on there. And you need all of these components, the human capital, the intellectual property, the fixed assets as well as the money. And now the question becomes, who cares for these other elements of capital, apart from the finance director looking after the money one? What's our most important resource, we're always told? Okay, so our most important resource, we're told, is our people. We have this thing, or at least we have done for a while, called HR. How much longer have I got, by the way? 20 minutes. So we've got this thing, which is the HR function. What does HR stand for in terms of what the initials mean? Human resources. I think they had more of a soul when they were called personnel. I mean, that's not a great name either, is it? But and what about the next question? What is it that human resources should actually be standing up for in terms of our people? Supporting our people? What does supporting our people mean? Yeah, I mean, the whole life cycle, although the recruitment through to termination sounded a bit more like HR than personnel. If we were more on the personnel side, what would we be doing for our people? We'd be doing development. We'd also be doing company strategy and direction, skill pool, match the two together, succession planning and all those sorts of things. And then this one here, what do you think I meant by this? What does HR put up with? I say, what does the workforce put up with in the context of our organisations? We've got this context. Sometimes it's great, sometimes it's not. Do you know this book on the right-hand side here? Robert Sutton, professor, I think, at somewhere like Harvard, he and Pfeffer wrote the knowing-doing gap, which is pretty relevant to PMOs. We know how to do it, people just don't do it. Sutton's much more famous for having written this one. By the way, last time I talked about his book, I tweeted, I've just been talking about no arsehole role. At, I think he's Bob Sutton, at Bob Sutton. 2 minutes later I got back, wow, great. Since when does somebody in London talk about a professor somewhere in the US and get a response within 2 minutes? I mean, it's like, things are connected. So actually what I want to suggest is that somewhere in the organisation we need the ability to look after change, and we do say people are our most important asset, and I'm also going to suggest that today, rather than 1950 or 1850 or whatever, getting hold of capital in the sense of money is so much easier than getting hold of capital in the sense of people who know how to interact with each other and interact with the process. They know the marketplace, etc. So, show of hands, in your organisations, who would say that their CFO is more powerful than their HR whatever? Wow, look how many hands that is. And yet, earlier, if you were stood here, you'd be able to see that was a lot more than half the audience. Yet we had, 15. Good. How many slides have I got to go? They took my page numbers off. Oh, 18. No, they moved my page number. 18. Oof. Hey, you're all right to be here for another hour, aren't you? So, if we say our most important asset is actually our people, and we say that the function that looks after our people is our HR rather than our CFO, I think that what we're channeling down now is a route that says, if our most important thing is our people, it's our people and their ability to interact that forms our organisation, and our organisation is now externally continually buffeted by pressures, we need as an organisation a mechanism, a manner, a support function that says, how do we shepherd this collection of people forwards in a way that returns benefit either as value for money to the community or as profit to the shareholders. I just want to try this for a second. Just think about a situation in the past where you were faced by an unnegotiable change. Maybe you were made redundant. Yes, I guess by implication. But rather than I wasn't characterising it as by negative. After all, I got fired from the stock exchange 25 years ago, and it was the best thing that ever happened to me, but it wasn't what I felt at the time. But no, it's an unnegotiable change. But if you want to interpret it as negative, that's fine. But the key thing here is that the change is not something that you were consulted about. Can you think of a situation in your past where you were subjected to a change that you didn't have a voice in, that was unnegotiable? So, yeah, that's the sort of thing, but so it could be workplace, doesn't have to be workplace. Might be your neighbour cutting a branch off a tree that's grown in your garden, and you think, well, that was my tree, not their tree. So think about how you feel about the people who subjected you to that change, and just share a thought exchange a thought with a person next to you. So how did you feel about the person who put you in a situation where you had a change that was non-negotiable? So those people who have just had a thought shared with them, how many of the thoughts that arrived with you from the other person were positive and smiling and upbeat? And how many questioned the parentage of the person who, yeah, okay. So so actually, one of the things that we should recognise is that the major drag on our organisations being buffeted by all this transformational change is the emotional, the sociological and the psychological impact it has on our people. And do we look after that as a PMO? So let me just scratch my head there and think, okay, as a PMO, I've never really had decent support from the rest of the organisation that says, you want me to try and lead change in this organisation? You're fine when what I'm doing is putting 5 Gantt charts together or sticking a camera on a Kanban board somewhere so it can be seen all around the organisation. But when we start talking about the transformational impact on the people, that's not really got a home. We haven't got the HR person with a title or a role that really reflects the people. And driving change through the business is really about the people. We're in a business context where change is driving us and we need concern for our people. So I think the future PMO needs to link and sync people, purpose, procedure, strategy, marketplace. It's these things that the PMO in the future needs to be doing, and a large part of that is going to be about engaging and engaging's not the word I want. It's about sympathising with, allowing people the emotional journey, recognising the culture. Do you know the quote from Drucker? Culture eats strategy for breakfast. So it's great to have strategy, but if you don't manage the culture, so I think we need to be the coordinator. Somebody needs to be the coordinating function. Is that in the PMO? So that's why I crossed out CC, Chief Change Officer at the beginning, because sometimes you need an enterprise transformation leader. I don't think you need them all the time, but you do need somebody to take that role. And then that comes to the question about things like EPMO, or Enterprise Project Management Office. So I'm going to say great decision making is situational, it's nuanced, it's swift. So that says that the finance management, all those sorts of things need to be out with the people, in the business. so that it can be local and swift and informed, etc. But local equals duplication. Duplication equals cost. It's visible. We're back to the 2-to-1 ratio of, well, if I put all this stuff out there, look at the costs. Yeah, but what about the value? Well, that's very difficult to see. So is great approach here to centralize it all? I don't think it is, but I think maybe to run an organization that can support change and transformation, it needs a centralized dimension, but it probably needs actually the bottom picture, which is the networked, the spread across the organization. I'd have used a cleverer word. Distributed was the word I wanted. So great decision making is situational, but it needs to be centralized so it's coordinated. No, it needs to be decentralized so it's swift. No, it needs to be actually, I don't think there's an answer here. It's going to depend on the personality of your board, and it's going to depend on the personality of the marketplace, and it's going to depend on the cycle time of the marketplace, and all those other factors. So we might well have an ePMO, a centralized pool of expertise, and maybe then it's not the Enterprise Program Management Office, it's the Enterprise Change Leadership Office. And then maybe it's run by a Chief Change Officer. And while we're doing change that's aggregation, maybe that's enough. But when we're doing change that is responding to disruptive events, and we need to care about the people as well as just the plant and machinery and procedures and IT, etc., then maybe it's an enterprise transformation leader. And maybe that's a transitory role rather than a permanent one. So is the argument now that we make the ePMO centralized? I mean, I'm sorry to you folks, I'm not providing you with an answer. I don't think I can answer it for your context. I can only raise the question. But what I would say, the challenge here is, does your PMO have a clear and secure future path? And if it does, great. And if it doesn't, here are some suggestions about the factors that might shape that route forwards. In which case, now it's what happens if you go back and you start having the conversations. So that's really my call to action to you is, if you feel comfortable, great. If you don't feel comfortable or you want to test whether that comfortableness is well placed, then go start asking the questions about change leadership. And when you start asking questions about change leadership, start asking questions about transformational leadership rather than administration of change run from somewhere else. And as the professionals in change, then does our roles begin and end with how do we support the control of that, or do we now start getting involved in the content? And if we start getting involved in the content, does that mean rising to this level as a 10-year journey in the organisation, so we build those networks and we have an intimate understanding of the business? I just sort of circle back in the last slide or two and say one other thing. It's been my experience that project managers and program office folk are very often, if you do a Myers-Briggs test on them, their last letter is a J. They're decision makers. That's great for running projects. I sort of think that in this context, what we need is people who are Ps, they're gatherers, they're listeners, they're pattern formers, and maybe the people that our organisations naturally see as going through succession have a personality type that's less than fitted for maybe where we want to be in the future. I was talking to somebody recently who said, of course, you know this Myers-Briggs stuff is complete. And I went, yeah, it's a model. And all models are absolutely, by definition, wrong. Just sometimes they're useful as well. So I don't claim that this one is an absolute determinator, but it's a useful indicator. I think we need people in there with these sorts of things. We need to look to Hertzberg and Maslow and others, because they had a lot of useful insight, even if the models don't actually fit entirely. I think that the change leader or the change officer can sit in the PMO with good skills in ongoing operations. Oh, I think I might even finish before then. Hey, what do you think of that? Prospect of being early. Yeah. Of course, there's no budget dimension here, but we are covering the scope. So I think if you're going to be the change officer, then if you've got an operational perspective in things, and you know how to support people to build momentum and culture and sell ideas and stuff like that, great. If you're going to be the transformation leader, then I think there are some other challenges in there. It reflects back on Andy's point at the end of his presentation, the one that was just before here, where he said you earn respect, but you need to be you need the respect in the organisation, because you need to be able to do things like take account of people's fears and deal with that. You need to allow people to spend time going through the mourning stage. You need to be able to represent the different constituencies there, which doesn't mean that everybody gets a vote, but everybody needs to be listened to. People need to be heard. People need to be moved through the change curve. So a dichotomy for me. Chief Change Control Officer, I think, is an inevitable conclusion. I think our organisations are always going to need somebody in that role. I'm not sure that it's necessarily everything we need. Thank you very much for listening.